Welcome, Multiversites. It's me, your multiverse maniac, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome back to episode 3 in our discussion of the multiverse as it plays out, in the DC and uh, Marvel comic universes and movie universes. So sit back, buckle your seatbelts, and we will continue our discussion. You might remember last week we were talking about the multiverse in the DC comics, which is they really got there first. Honestly, they really were the ones to get there, beginning in way back in 1953, and we talked about that, so you can check that out. But it was an issue of Wonder Woman in 1953, where Wonder Woman is really the first comic book character, the first superhero character to encounter the multiverse, to encounter another version of herself. So if you missed that one, go back and check it out. It's pretty interesting stuff. So we are talking all things multiverse in the DC and Marvel comic and cinematic universes, and also actual science research and theories around what many scientists believe is a real life multiverse. It's out there, they say, or maybe it's in here. I don't know, but it's fascinating, amazing stuff. And I love to get into it. So we will talk more about that. My guess is if you are listening to the podcast or if you are watching this on YouTube, you've probably already seen Marvel's Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. But if you haven't, just to warn you, I will be getting into some spoilery stuff later on in the show, but I will give you a big heads up before I do that. So you can click off and listen or watch later when you've seen it. But do go see it. It's pretty awesome. Let me say it's, if you haven't seen it, it's got lots of surprises, maybe not as many as some were expecting, including myself, but the ones that they do have were really great. Some top-notch performances from really all the cast. But Benedict Cumberbatch and Elizabeth are just wonderful. Some of the disappointments, and they're not really disappointments, but kind of expectations that I had, and maybe I shouldn't have had coming into the movie, but I felt like it didn't quite go far enough into some of the madness that they could have, and that comes from me loving the Doctor Strange comics so much. I mean, there's some wild stuff, particularly in the early comics from the golden age, from the 60s and 70s. There's just some amazing stuff in there. So I'd hoped that maybe they would get into a little of that, but they didn't really. But it's understandable. It's for a mainstream audience. I was kind of amazed that they got away with what they did, considering a lot of their audience are kids, and frankly, there's been some blowback about that from some corners who felt it was just too scary for kids, because it's kind of a horror movie. It really is, and it's directed by Sam Raimi, who is known for some of the best horror movies in contemporary times, including Evil Dead 2, which is at once a horror movie and a parody of horror movie, and that's hard to pull off. But he does a great job. He does a great job here too. But and there were a few plot holes that kind of went unexplained. But again, that's not uncommon for a Marvel movie of this type, which is appealing to a broader audience, and especially the time constraints that you have, they are really in this movie trying to set up a lot of stuff that's coming down the pike for the multiverse. So this is not the end of the multiverse in the MCU. It's really just getting started. So let's talk more about that later. Right now, let's have a brief look at the history of the multiverse in Marvel Comics and Doctor Strange's history as well, because they are intertwined. So if you're familiar with the Doctor Strange comics, especially the early ones that I just mentioned before, you might be a little confused about his seeming ignorance of the multiverse as we see it in the MCU version of Doctor Strange. I mean, he, after all, deals with different dimensions all the time and creatures that inhabit it. And in fact, in the movie, well, we'll talk about that later. Let me not, because I got to give you the spoiler alert first. But that's his job, is to protect the Earth from these, creatures from these different dimensions. So, two things to remember here first. MCU Doctor Strange is way less advanced than he is in the comics. He's really just starting out. He's not even Sorcerer Supreme yet. So he's got a lot to learn. And the second thing to remember is that dimensions are different from the multiverse. They are not parallel worlds. They're not different versions of the same Earth or anything like that. They are places that exist that are entirely different from Earth, completely different, or any versions of Earth that exist or may have been created. They're not opposite or altered, but they're entirely something else. So the creatures that inhabit them are not even sometimes remotely humanoid. And we see one of those creatures show up in the beginning of Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness, but we'll get to that later. They are what some people might call devils or demons. And in theory, each parallel world in the multiverse would have its own other dimensions, which, with these kinds of creatures in them. And it's very complicated. I know. Don't worry, I'm not going to go too far into that. But just to specify that that's really the difference between dimensions and the multiverse. Now, keep in mind here, there's two things going on in the comics. Yeah, Strange is battling all these creatures from these different dimensions, and he's, aware of all of them. But in the MCU, what they're trying to do is they're putting everything under this umbrella of multiverse. And that includes dimensions and, parallel worlds and all of that stuff. So, and they're doing that just to make it simpler for the, average casual Marvel movie fan who doesn't have a lot of knowledge from the comics or anything like that. So they are just simplifying everything by putting it all under the under the multiverse umbrella, which is fine because that gives us more to talk about on this program. But just suffice it to say that Doctor Strange in the comics has spent decades battling demons and cosmic beings in the most bizarre dimensions imaginable. And as I said, MCU Doctor Strange, Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange is just getting started. He hasn't really done a lot of that, but he's just getting into it now. In the comics, which is what we're talking about today. So we'll talk more about the movie in the next episode. But he really doesn't, even though he's battling these different dimensions, he doesn't really encounter the multiverse itself until a series, comic book series in 2015, which is called Secret War. And keep that name in mind, because we're going to come back around. We're going to circle around and talk about that, because it's a major, major touchstone for what's coming up in the MCU. So let's go back to the beginning of Marvel's multiverse, which really doesn't start until 1977. Now, you remember I told you 1953 is where DC begins its journey, and it really doesn't solidify until 63. So we're talking about a good 14-year gap, 24 if you add in the Wonder Woman episode, between DC's multiverse and Marvel's. So it starts in 1977 with the first installment of the What If series. Now, that name might be familiar to you. If you're not familiar with the comic book series, you've probably heard of the Disney Plus show of the same name. And it covers some of the same territory. Basically, it explores these possibilities of parallel worlds where different versions of our favorite Marvel heroes have different lives that play out. And they're all tended to and observed by a mysterious being known as the Watcher. The What If comic series really sets most of the ground rules for Marvel's multiverse. But it doesn't all come together until 1983 with a comic series. It's called the Daredevils. And it comes together in that Prime Earth. That's the Earth where, you know, all of the action in the comics, and now officially in the MCU as well, because that is made very clear in Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness. This is where Prime Earth gets a designation, and it's called 616. That's the number of the Earth that, you know, ostensibly we inhabit, and in which all of the actions that we have seen of all of our heroes and in the Marvel comic universe and cinematic universe, that's where it all happens. So that's the Prime Earth. Now, we're going to get into talking about the movie now, Marvel's Multiverse of Madness. So if you have not seen Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness yet, this is the time for you to click off and come back when you've seen it, okay? Because I don't want to ruin anything for anybody. I will say it's a movie you'll probably need to see several times before you get everything. But okay, so we're going to talk about this right now. So in the Doctor Strange movie, the alternate Earth that they most of the action is set in is called Earth 838. So this is where the Illuminati that you saw with Charles Xavier and Reed Richards and the others, and Captain Carter, where they have this sort of tribunal called the Illuminati. And we see Doctor Strange face them. They've had their own version of Doctor Strange who's gone rogue, and they had to dispatch with him. Okay. So this is where most of the movie takes place, the alternate Earth uh, action takes place in 838. Now uh, there are other versions, there are other Earths that they encounter along the way. Most notably, early on in the beginning of the film, you see Strange and America. They're kind of free falling through all of these different parallel worlds, and you see the different characteristics of these worlds. Some are animated, some are where there's nothing but devastation, somewhere there's nothing but beautiful trees. And so you see all of these different Earths flash by really quickly. That's their way of sort of giving you an idea of how much this encompasses without actually going to each of these versions of Earth. But 838 is the main place that they go to. And so 838 is also a very major component of the comics. And as we move on towards what this whole multiverse arc in the MCU is leading to, which we'll talk about in a minute, as set up by both Loki and, well, we've pretty much seen most of what WandaVision has set up for us, but we haven't yet incorporated all of the things that the Loki series has set up for us. But what this is all leading to is something I'll tell you in a minute, because I want to mention something else. I talked about how Doctor Strange is battling all these demons and creatures from different dimensions without them necessarily being part of the multiverse. And one of them shows up actually in the beginning of the series. This is the giant creature that's attacking the city, and he saves America from that. So it's a version of Dormammu, who is a major villain in Doctor Strange comics. They don't say his name because I think there's legal issues around it. They may not have the rights fully to use those yet, but these are the kinds of creatures that Doctor Strange in the comics generally battles. So they give us a glimpse of that. And that may be a bit for comic book purists and things like that, but they give us a glimpse of that at the beginning. And they turn it around by saying that that's actually Scarlet Witch that is in control of all of these demons in her quest to get America and use her power so that she can go back and see her boys. Yes, we're going to get into Scarlet Witch and some questions about that. That'll be next episode. So back to where this is all leading, because if you were wondering, as I mentioned, in 2015, Marvel put out a series called Secret War, which is this epic battle that takes place in the multiverse. All these different multiverses battling each other. And you may recall that I mentioned I guess it was the first episode where we were talking about Marvel. I mentioned the Loki series and Kang, or He Who Remains, and how there were many different versions of him. He actually stumbled upon or discovered the multiverse, and that all of these different multiverses with the different versions of him began to try to destroy each other. Well, that's what's coming. That's what's setting the table for Secret Wars, which is what this whole arc is leading to, and we'll probably see in about 3 or 4 years. There's also Time Runs Out, which is another series, and they're going to incorporate that in with Secret Wars. But essentially, it's going to be this epic battle between Earths in the multiverse. We've already seen how the multiverse fabric is being sort of torn apart, and that hasn't stopped. Even with the events of the Doctor Strange movie, it's still going on, and we know that because this blonde lady shows up to tell Doctor Strange just that. Just as he's getting his third eye, by the way, which is famously one of the characteristics of Doctor Strange. And we'll talk about that more too. But she explains that there's more incursion going on in the multiverse and that he is needed. And so she whisks him away. So in case you were wondering who that was, besides being Charlize Theron, that is going to be a character that comes from the Doctor Strange comics. And she is sort of an acolyte of Doctor Strange's, but she's also as powerful as Doctor Strange, and they eventually hook up and they become married. So in essence, they're bringing in Doctor Strange's wife. So you're going to see more of that character in later Doctor Strange movies for sure. You don't hire someone like Charlize Theron for a, kind of a throwaway cameo, that's for sure. So we're going to see that, and so we'll talk more about her character and how it shows up in the comics and how it might show up in the MCU in the next episode as well. But I want to quickly, before I go, I want to quickly bring in the science aspect to all of that, which is something I try to incorporate in every episode of this show. And we talked about, the beginnings of actual multiverse science in the fact that we have these technologies that are allowing scientists to see what hasn't been seen before. And one of those things, as I mentioned in the last episode, was a cold spot that signifies the idea that there are other worlds that are kept apart from our world by a certain buffer zone, if you will. And so to add to that, we just recently have gotten word that the first image of the Milky Way's supermassive black hole has been provided by a group of scientists studying this, and it's called the Event Horizon Telescope. And they've been taking, and that and the Hubble telescope has allowed scientists to see black holes for the first time. And there's been a deep curiosity from scientists wondering what lies at the heart of our galaxy that pulls stars into tight orbits through its immense gravity. Well, that's what the black hole does. But we've never been able to get a detailed glimpse of it, and we have that now. So again, as these technological breakthroughs come through and we begin to see what's never been seen before, we'll begin to get a greater understanding and be able to actually perhaps study in a scientific method the multiverse. the real, true multiverse. Because, as I've said, many scientists, going back to even Einstein, and going further back, Schrodinger, and even current scientists today have a belief that there is a multiverse. So we will definitely be keeping an eye on that on this show and talking about anything and everything that comes up around that. So until next time, I will see you in the multiverse somewhere. And please hit those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already, and tell your friends. I would love to have your input on anything I've been talking about, any questions you have about the Multiverse of Madness movie or anything else that we've talked about in the MCU or DC universes. Love to hear from you. And take care, and we'll see you next time.